And now here's part 2 of our episode. We'll pivot back to the music here in a second, but I think in terms of like just for a Western audience, you know, like and me as the white Midwestern fellow that has been so generously introduced to this to the films that you have introduced me to. Like Amir's the most famous, you know, he's probably the most famous actor on earth. You know, like he's just that big. And so the fact that he goes from doing Lagan to going to doing this $1 million film and then takes a 4-year hiatus, you know, like there's like this was his last film before he took a 4-year acting hiatus, right?
That is correct. And for that exact reason, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to get in here and say that I would love to live in a world where Amir Khan is the most famous of the Khans. But I believe it was 1965, we got 3 guys born in the same year. We got Amir Khan, we got Salman Khan, and we do have Shah Rukh Khan. And those other two, you know, and so like if you're gonna talk about it, right? Like Worldwide Don, man, I feel like Shah Rukh Khan. There's your Tesha reference for the day. But he's the guy, right? But what I love about Amir Khan is that he takes that 4-year hiatus, right? How long did we have to wait for Dhoom 3?
Which is also a killer film.
Ridiculous, right? A ridiculous movie that man did not have to learn how to tap dance in order to do. He did not have to, but he did because he was like, look, Hrithik Roshan is changing the game for the male dancers. Like, what is being asked of them? You know, Amitabh Bachchan changed the game, but like if you look back at what they're doing now, you know, I mean, they're very simple moves. Like Amitabh Bachchan changed the game because he was like, yeah, the dudes should dance too, right? I'm going to get in there. But then you've got Hrithik Roshan who, like, I mean, have either of you seen that man move? It's ridiculous.
There's a whole genre of movements that I see in these dance sequences that I'm certain my body can't do them. I'm certain.
And that's what's really exciting to me about Koi Kahe is that those 3 guys, I mean, right, they're all like 10 years older than the characters they're playing, right? So like where this
particularly Amir, right?
Right. So like where this sits in the elder millennial Gen Z spectrum is a little, I don't know, it's a little funky. Michael, I would love your thoughts on this. But like, you know, I don't know that those guys go as hard as they do on that dance floor if Hrithik Roshan isn't already out there, you know, a few years earlier with Kahona Pyar Hai, like shaking his damn thing. Like he doesn't need to, but he did.
I don't know. I think the it just reminded me of sort of the argument everyone has about why it's always people who are at least like 35 or 40 playing Hamlet because they're just right? because they can't handle the what's needed for that role, and so then you end up like, because Hamlet's supposed to be what, like 17 or something like that. Yeah. And yet it's, you know, I mean, the one time I worked on a production of it, I think the actor who played it was in his 40s. I mean, he was a young looking 40s, but you know, nevertheless.
Yeah, how old was Mike McHugh when we did it?
I was just about to say he was prime Hamlet age to be your Hamlet. That was good. He was good. He was a great Hamlet. Hey Mike, if you're listening to this, you were an excellent Hamlet, and also you're very handsome, and I like you.
It's interesting. I would like a few Mike McHughes later. I'd like to know how many Mike McHughes.
Oh, you know what? You're not supposed to be steering this, but you can have 17 Mike McHughes.
But you know, it is interesting because right. So this movie is 2001, and I will say for me in terms of also my, you know, fall of 2001 is when I started undergrad, right? So that's also me going away from. And I think that this was a movie and this was a soundtrack that, you know, prior to this, I was watching the movies that my parents would bring home on Friday nights from the local dukan, right? They'd bring a DVD or a VHS, probably, right? A VHS and laddus, right? Or samosas, and at some point they became DVDs. But I remember that this was a movie I found on my own and said to my parents, hey, you need to watch this. I'm sorry, are we supposed to be talking about Tanhai?
Well, I wanted to bring it back to like the album itself, because I think that, I mean, kind of if we're thinking about the soundtrack as a genre of album, is there a separate set of is there a different rubric that this checks off? Because I mean, like what makes this a good soundtrack album?
Yeah, right. I mean, some of it is right. So some of the things we've talked about, right? There, I do think. Is it gonna get? It's not about is it gonna get played at my cousin's wedding, but like, you know, and I think especially I'm thinking about it in this terms because like I'm thinking of like all the ways we used to gather in the before times, and like I really miss those events. But it is you know, so many of these songs are used to bring communities of people together. That's also what I love about Bollywood movies is, this movie was, it did okay in India, huge in the NRI population. And that's something else that we track that I was tracking at the time when movies came out, right? Like how well did it do, at home versus how well did it do abroad? And I do think this soundtrack has a bigger NRI following. And it's interesting because, like, if you look at the review I sent you, it mostly gets slammed for how Western it is.
Yeah,
but that's also part of, like, why it has stuck around, because nobody had done anything like that before. And so, again, that's part of why, like, you got to be a little risky, I think, to get to 11.
There's a risk factor. Oh, I like that. Okay, that might need to be enshrined. I mean, enshrining a risk factor seems... I need to think about that a little bit more, but I like that take. I like that there needs to be a risk. And I do think that there is something to, like, a particular musician or composer using certain motifs in their recurring motifs over the course of different albums or different eras or stuff. And I think there is, whether that's just purely like instrumental sounds that you see as characteristic or whatever, I think that is, but a lot of the things, a lot of the albums that we've talked about and a lot of the artists that we've discussed so far in the life of this pod they've been albums that weren't necessarily the most popular album, maybe. No, I think a lot of them were the most popular album, but they did something distinctly different that kind of like opened up from whatever that artist's normal stable of sound was.
Can I call in my favorite moment from season 1 so far? Is that something to double back to?
Sure.
Just speaking of things that were popular or not popular at the time. Ashlyn Lozano was a fantastic guest. I too was very attached to Third Eye Blind's self-titled debut album, and I really, really enjoyed the moment where Tyler and Ashlyn were very staunchly like, this wasn't popular, and then there was this like micro pause before Michael goes, actually it was.
Yeah, we said like we knew.
My favorite Gen Z correction of season 1. I was here for it.
It was because there was a year that we didn't think Stephen Jenkins was awful. Like, yeah.
25 years now. Isn't that what I just saw? 25 years of Third Eye Blind.
I don't want to give him more time on this podcast.
You can cut this part.
Stephen, no, we're keeping it in, so people remember.
It does bring in our, here comes your, that we need to have a jingle for Radiohead reference.
Sure, yeah.
Lavina, I don't know if you saw this, but Stephen Jenkins recently was essentially comparing himself to Tom York, saying that they deserved the respect. They deserved the respect from critics, and the musical Third Eye Blind deserved the sort of artistic freedom that is granted to Radiohead, which I disagree with, Mr. Jenkins. You don't. Sorry.
I'm gonna move past that one, but I will say that to the point of like music criticism. Mm-hmm. And why, listen, we also know that like there is great love for the underdog in my tastes. And yes. I do think, when this, it's wild to me because the movie, to your point, right, it's actually the movie I don't think is an underdog, but I do think the soundtrack is.
Can you say more words about that?
Yeah, for example, right, when this movie came out, people were watching this movie for Amir Khan, right? Because it was like, yeah, that guy just did Lagan, right? More of that. And, right, I think Dimple Kapadia was a big draw. But musically, I don't think we had seen a lot from these, we both hadn't seen a lot from these composers, and we hadn't listened to a lot that was dabbling into that Indo-Western or into that kind of fusion, and so I think contextually, I mean, some of the reviews I sent you, but I think when the soundtrack came out, I think a lot of people like just didn't understand it. They didn't know how to contextualize it, and I think that's the point of like why we study criticism and why criticism should evolve, right? Not all critics are not every critic is the right sort of like person to contextualize different pieces of art.
Sure.
And so, I growing up, like I remember I would read these Planet Bollywood reviews at my day job at the box office. And you know, I grew up right in a predominantly white suburb, so I didn't have a lot of those reflections of self growing up, and so, you know, I would look to other people. I would look to, you know, Indian music critics to help contextualize some things. And I don't have a strong memory of reading that Planet Bollywood review, right, that I shared with you all, but I must have, because I read all the reviews from there, and I think like that's when I latched on to, for example, the Satya soundtrack, which I think is an amazing soundtrack, but is a movie that I don't really have as strong of a relationship to. But I guess what I'm saying, and what I'm taking a long way to say, is I'm glad the original criticism for this album didn't really stick with me, because I think if it had, I wouldn't have liked this album as much as I do.
Is narrative important to you in an album? And I know that, like, since this is a soundtrack where the music was composed for the film, there's obviously already a narrative, but I can think of a lot of other soundtrack albums where the music, like, if you've seen the movie, you can see the narrative, and if you really listen to the music closely, you might be able to stitch something together, but because often it's unrelated artists all composing one big, you know, like, soundtrack. I guess, is that, you know, as a theater artist, are you someone who just craves some sort of narrative in your listening experience?
I mean, I think it depends, right? I don't think I necessarily crave that, or I don't ask that of Bollywood soundtracks in the same way that I might of like a Disney soundtrack or a musical theater soundtrack. Like, I think my experience is that these songs for me, and again, maybe that's because, as you say, they're both earworms, like orally and visually, many of them. So for me,
eyeworms.
Yeah, eyeworms, right?
That sounds gross.
But boogers? No. Anyway, sorry. You know, I think there's something about the arc, the way that these story. It was once said to me when I was studying musical theater, that, you know, in great musical theater, the positioning of the songs in the book are such that, you know, the songs come out when the emotion is so extreme that we have no choice but to, you know, express it through song, whatever.
Right.
And so, and I think a great Hindi movie does that as well. And I think it's part of the fun for me, as especially like after you grow to, you know, understand the rhythm of watching a movie, you can feel the buildup of the song, you can like feel it coming. But I'd say for me, like, Wo Ladki Hai Kahan has a gorgeous journey as a song, right? Those two are not they're well, again, spoilers. They're at one point in their relationship before the song, and they're at one point in their relationship after the song, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, there's a compression of time happening. I mean, it's in some ways it's like kind of like a montage. The fact that like the thing next to thing. I mean, I just think, and it just makes me think like one of my favorite film soundtracks is the Magnolia soundtrack, which is also mostly done by one artist, mostly Amy Mann. But
well, and like something like Wo Ladki Hai Kahan, which is also you know, it's self-referential in the way that it's filmed, but it's very funny. It's theatrical. I remember, like, I would host when I was an RA. I would have, you know, the other directors in the drama school over, and I remember showing them this movie. And I remember at one point we had to pause, and I left my pal Evan in my apartment, and I don't remember what happened. We go away, and we came back, and I was like, Evan, did you try to rewatch that song when we were gone? Because I saw that like things were different. He was like, yeah, I fucking love this song. It's great, you know?
Also, the start of that song reminds me too. I mean, I one of the things that struck me about this album was sort of like the eccentricity of instrumentation throughout the whole thing. Right. The fact that like that one starts out and it sounds a little bit like, are we about to hear an Irish jig? Like at what point?
Something that was specifically called out in the Planet Bollywood review. They're like, we hate this. I love it. I love it. You know? Listen, it catches your ear. It tells you something different's about to happen.
Yeah.
I like that too. So I wanted to bring up a couple things that we've already talked about. One was skips. And then because we're collating our skips, no skips data. So that's soon we'll have a leaderboard of whether the hive mind of guests on this show believe that a perfect album has any skips or.
Well, I would say this though. I would say it's a little bit of a gray area for me. I would say that Akash's love theme is a skip. Mm-hmm. But I also don't count it as part of the soundtrack. It's not the same composition team.
Yeah, that's a good caveat to that.
Yeah, I literally when I looked it up, I was like, I don't know her.
No, that makes sense. Then the other thing was like, what would you say is how this soundtrack exists for you now? Because clearly, like, it's something that you recommend to people, and that you like have a very strong opinion about. Like, where does this music come up in your life now, if at all?
Well, I do love. It's funny. I was talking to my buddy Anish yesterday. It's interesting to me, like, generationally. I love talking about this because, like, if you've made the leap to late '90s, early aughts Bollywood.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to have some awesome, really specific conversations with you in the same way that if you made that like 92 to 94 figure skating window, like, yeah, let's go. But like, dear God, don't get me into the current stuff. I don't know that, and
Yeah.
it's a little similar with Hindi movies for me. There's a couple of the more recent ones that if they're highly recommended, it comes my way. But I think that I get really excited when I know people know like this era of music or movies. I get excited to like, yeah, wasn't that soundtrack great? But I also know that, if people's like, this isn't the first Amir Khan movie that comes to mind, right? It's Lagan, maybe it's Doom 3. Dangal is a great movie. But this isn't necessarily, though it's the first Amir Khan movie that comes to mind for me. It is, I think it's interesting to me because it both is and is not a deep cut. Like, can it still be a deep cut if Koi Kahe is still going to get everybody on the dance floor 20 years later? I don't know. Can both things be true?
Yeah, I think you've made a case that would say that it would, and there's it speaks to the life that the soundtrack has taken outside of the film itself. It has stayed relevant. So I think those two things can exist at the same time.
I'm curious again to hear from you all. I mean, especially, Tyler, we've watched a few of these movies together. If there's anything you all want to throw in of I don't know, things that get you jazzed, or like things that feel maybe key ingredients in the perfect Bollywood soundtrack, right? So we got them beats, right? They're gonna make us drum on a dole. The cousin's wedding litmus test, I think. Iconic flute and or didgeridoo riff. Of this time period, there is often, for better or worse, an uncomfortable rap section. And I would argue that the closest that this soundtrack gets is actually the title. It doesn't lean too hard into it, but we get a little bit of that in the title song. I also think that title song is kind of incredible. Actually, because we were talking about this. Okay. So the task of a title song in a Hindi movie is a very particular task, right? It's gotta serve the trailer, it's gotta serve the movie, and then like maybe it stands a shot at standing on its own. I would say that third one is actually often the least important, and I think what's incredible about the title song in this movie, Dil Chahta Hai, is and it's tied to the way I experience this album. It is meant to be a road trip song.
Oh,
it is
yeah.
meant to be a song that you listen to in your car and you have your feelings about, like, those good times with your pals. And that actually,
like when they're going to Goa, right?
Yeah.
That's when, yeah. It's just a road trip song through and through. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's got that little bit of a, like, that little to it, but it doesn't fall into, I think, the uncomfortable category that the Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum does with the rap at the top of You Are My Sonia, which goes, she's so cool, she's so fine, out of 10, I give her 9. Why? What a ridiculous scale. Anyway, but like and look, listen, those people walked so Tesher and MIA and Raja Kumari could run, right? Sometimes you don't have to be the best, you just have to be the first so that other people can follow up on it. But yeah, I would say that this one toes that line but doesn't dip too far into the, like, please stop rapping.
Yeah. You can feel it. You can feel they're just on the precipice of it, but it doesn't happen.
There's also, there must be something music theory based that I don't understand about what signals something as a road trip song, because there are so many times I listen to an album and I'm like, I want to listen to this album while I am driving someplace. And I don't know if it's something to do with the tempo, or if there's a specific riff, or like if there's a chord progression. Like, I mean, I know a bunch about music, but I don't know what the thing is that makes something essentially a road trip song.
And like in this point for me, what else is in there? Like Maroon 5 why, but it is. Matchbox 20, yup. Is
Oh,
that in
shoot,
conversation?
yeah.
Right?
Matchbox
Right?
20.
Is that in conversation with Tanhai? Maybe a little bit. I don't know.
I like that take a lot, actually, and I'm not gonna. Rob Thomas is somebody who hasn't come up much on this pod, but that's probably a bit of a crime.
I mean, absolutely, right? Who else I was listening to at that time? Very, very much Matchbox 20.
Yeah, I remember Matchbox 20 makes me think of driving my 1987 Buick LeSabre to go work at the Putt Putt on Erie Boulevard in Syracuse, New York. I have a very specific memory with Matchbox 20.
And to an extent, right? Like that's me. Hinsdale to Skokie, these two soundtracks, one way Lagan, one way Dil Chahta Hai. But you know what? Sometimes, more often than not, actually Dil Chahta Hai both ways. Because
why not?
Well, and because if I were to make the switch from that soundtrack to the radio, that was a different switch than going from Lagan to the radio. Ooh,
yeah,
hard turn.
Too hard to turn.
Sometimes too hard to turn.
I'm gonna give some love to the Chicago suburbs for. We'll give you 52 points for Hinsdale, Illinois, and Skokie, Illinois, showing up. Bless those places. Miss you, Chicago. You're a beautiful place. Any other bits that you wanted to add, Lavina? Any other? Please, or anything you wanted to ask of us. We're open at this point.
I want to make sure I'm not. Well, yeah. I mean, I'm curious if anybody else has I don't know, ingredients that they want to offer, but I will say, and I want to make sure that I'm not dipping into, or I'm not stepping on y'all's toes in terms of your standout track. But I think, how do I want to say this? A category that is not required, but a category I think that has evolved. I think specifically, in conversation with Amir Khan, is the like banger graduation song. Yeah. Which I think this movie checks that box hard, and it's kind of amazing to me, right? Because this movie manages to have a song that will get everybody on the dance floor at my cousin's wedding, and yet none of those songs take place at a wedding. But there is a very prominent wedding scene in this movie. No spoilers, but it's interesting the way they piece those ingredients together. And listen, the song that gets everybody. Well, actually, maybe this is what it is, right? There should be some kind of massive celebration song that might be attached to a wedding, might be attached to a graduation, maybe is attached to a very specific cultural ceremony. Karva Chauth is often, right? Different wedding rituals. But I love the way this movie celebrates the iconic graduation song and that iconic graduation moment. It's also and I don't think you need to know that in order to appreciate Koi Kahe on its own, but I think it helps to know that, Amir Khan, early in his career, Kayamat se Kayamat tak, from Doomsday to Doomsday, has this, one of the songs that, talk about, I cannot hear this song and not visualize it. It's a song called Papa Kehte Hain, and he sings it, right, in a graduation. He sings the song, Papa Kehte Hain Baranama Karega, Beta Hamara Asa Kama Karega. My dad is saying, my son is going to go out into the world and do great things. And and then his thing is his little existential crisis is but nobody knows where my path will lead, is basically the journey of that graduation song. And so that's maybe 20 years before Koi Kahe comes out. But Koi Kahe, and listen, again, I'm not a native Hindi speaker, but the lyrics of this song, the hook of this song is basically we are new, why should our ways be old? And as somebody who spends a lot of time wrestling with the, the generational cycle breaker in me, that song is doing that. And I think it's really cool.
There's an expansiveness to it too. I think when you're talking about the things that I, in my small experience, experiencing Hindi movies, I always want something. I always look forward to something that's very sweeping in scope. And I think there are a couple songs in this on the soundtrack that really have that sweeping scope, and then the really personal love songs too. So there is a formula that I think is still you still experience in Dil Chahta Hai, but I can see now how it differs in pretty subtle ways thematically. That makes it different. That's the risk that you were talking about, I think. All right. To the scoreboard.
To the scoreboard.
Yeah. To the scoreboard. Okay. Lavina, we've covered a lot of like really useful things in terms of the musical context of the piece itself, where it stands as part of like very specifically film music, and what it does differently. So I think there were some really strong cases you made there. Love the beautiful images that you brought us of you driving back and forth between Hinsdale and Skokie, and those were the most recent points put on the board. For you got 52 points for bringing up the beautiful burgs of Hinsdale and Skokie, Illinois. So strong there. We also gave you 17 points for casting Mike McHugh as your Hamlet.
Thank you.
If you don't know him, he's just a great guy. He's a great guy. We love that guy. Anytime we get to bring him up. You got 15 points for We Are All That Uncle. We are all that uncle at the wedding, banging on the table, banging our drum all day. And then I gave you 3 points for A.R. Raymond turning this down, but still digging it. You know, he did fine. He came out of this smelling pretty good.
Listen, I am a huge fan of things that I cannot create. Michael Osinski, I love the things that come out of your brain. I will never make them, but I will come and show up every time.
That's a great point. Then we have 2 Yamaguchis. And then to start, you had a big old Laura Dern pushing herself out of that Jeep with her mouth agape at as the music swells behind her. So this is a pretty strong board. Any final little bit that you just want to drop in for us? Doesn't have to be long. Just like, is there any final little tidbit that you want to use to put a button on your case?
No, I think actually I feel like I've made my case pretty strongly. I just hearing all those points, and I'm not fishing for more, but like none for tight shiny pants.
Tight shiny pants got a call out in the 60-second review. Thank you very much. Tight shiny pants.
That's true.
And I wasn't kidding about the sheer shirt. Who's wearing the shirt? Was it Samir or was it Akash that was wearing the sheer shirt?
All of them at some point, but absolutely Akash, and like a very climactic scene. I'm like, I can see your belt buckle through your shirt. This is unacceptable to me.
Yeah, I think maybe sheer shirts are back, though. I don't know. I kind of feel like in LA they might be back.
I'm trying to remember. I'm trying to put myself back in 2001 as to whether or not that was a style. I can't remember.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing too, right? Is we're watching the MTV. There's like a slight delay, right, in the MTV videos and like the pop culture references we're riffing off of. So, I mean, that also, I think that is something that like always attracted me to Bollywood movies as an Indian American kid, was like there was always a little bit of nostalgia, but also some of that reflection of West, like watching them learn how to reflect and integrate Western culture and Western influences into their work was like also helping me understand like a little bit of the crossroads I sit at.
I mean, in that respect, like, yeah, I would say like the costuming, it is a little late 90s boy band-esque then, I guess.
Very much. Yeah. So, with the points on the board and with the way that you have filled up your argument, Lavina, we're going to deliberate now. Michael, knowing what we know and hearing the case that we heard, does the soundtrack to Dil Chahta Hai go to 11? Is it a perfect album?
I think considering the sort of the case that was made in terms of how each song seems to represent each character's unique journey, the fact that there are sort of 3 protagonists going through journeys here, the fact that the music itself not only conjures up earworms, but conjures up something that we did not even know existed until right now, which is that of an eye worm, or perhaps an eye booger, or some other term yet to be determined.
Workshop that one.
We're workshopping it, yeah.
Leave it in the comments.
Yeah. I believe that the soundtrack to Dil Chahta Hai is indeed a perfect album.
Yeah. Well played, Lavina. Well played, per usual. So, Lavina, is there anything that you wanted to share with our listeners? Anything that you're loving? Anything that you are obsessed with that you want to spread the word about?
Yeah, I want to spread the word about Sophia Chang's mentorship program, Unlock Her Potential, which I've been involved with since last year as both a volunteer and a donor. And Sophia Chang is the first Asian woman in hip hop. She was the manager for the Wu-Tang Clan for a while, and she has now she's written a book called The Baddest Bitch in the Room that I highly recommend. She's got a fantastic op-ed that just dropped in Huffington Post about her response to Asian American violence as violence against Asian Americans as somebody who lives in New York, and she's got this incredible mentorship program called Unlock Her Potential that provides mentorship for women of color across myriad fields. Some of them involve entertainment, some of them involve STEM, which speaks to the math nerd in my heart. And Sophia's just the real deal. But also, so I think like if you're a fan of Wu-Tang Clan, I think you'll be a fan of her. But also if you just feel like mentorship for women of color is the way to combat systemic racism and smash the patriarchy. Like, all right,
Amen.
She's the baddest bitch in the room.
Amen.
It's a nice way to end the episode.
We're so grateful for you coming, and you want to know what our track was?
I really, really do.
Well, it was completely split. Michael and I chose completely different things. So where are we going with?
We essentially decided on the track that sounded like it would be the best way to close the episode,
which is Koi Kahe.
Yeah.
We're gonna go with that. The graduation song. This one is the one that you said is still played at weddings. Still played at weddings to this day, which I think which speaks to its power. And you just gotta go watch the video too. Go watch the video of this on YouTube. It's magical. So we'll leave you on that one.
Thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.